Let's go.
I'm gonna pass that flat pencil around so you can look at it too. Now that's a fancy one. I've got over here somewhere, just a normal school pencil. Here's another one. Just to show you how simple that is. It's just our review.
It's not bad. It's sitting in your back.
Just plain a flat edge on there.
That's just.
And you can use that for all sorts of stuff. Let's say you have an arch top bridge and it's pretty close and you're trying to fit something to the top. You
It's already been
can lay that flat. Anything you need to transfer that's flat and you want to get it close up, you can use the flat pencil.
This thing, I'll just.
Do you get your, from SUMAP too?
A lot of times,
You don't like find a bone somewhere?
I've done that before,
Oh, really?
you know, people, I've tried all sorts of stuff like deer antler, I prefer to get it from Stu Mac because, it's always consistent. And, sometimes I'll buy like in bulk from all parts and I kind of like it. And then I'll get random pieces that will just have big pits in it, it's just, or sometimes I'll get pieces of bond that it's almost too powdery or something when I cut it. It just doesn't feel right. So there's a consistent, you don't have to buy it because they're gonna be more expensive than anything else, any other bone blanks that you see out there. But, if I'm charging someone to make a nut, then I'm just gonna go ahead and get the best thing I can find. And, it takes a long time to make a nut, so you may as well make it out of the best thing that you can. And other materials are fine too. I prefer bone because it's hard. And if you cut it right and everything goes as planned, then you shouldn't have very many tuning issues, within reason. Some guitars are just problematic with tuning issues, like Gretsch's, because of what we discussed yesterday, where you've got a break angle of the strings coming off of the peg head. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and fit this nut to the guitar. I'm going to glue it in, and I'm going to use Titebond to glue it in. You can use fish glue, Titebond. School glue is fine. Some people even water their glue down to glue it in. And super glue is okay, we just don't ever recommend it to anybody because it can get, I'm saying yes, it can get pretty bad quick. Titebond you can wipe off of anything that it gets on. Super glue, you're gonna try to wipe it off because that's your first instinct. Uh-oh, I got it on the finish, what do? Don't do that, don't rub it because you're just gonna either glue yourself to it and you're just gonna smear it, it's not gonna come off. It's just gonna smear it.
Acetone and nitro finishes don't.
Yeah, you're not gonna get it off of that acetone either. So you're gonna have to, if you're in a situation like that, you're gonna have to do some light sanding just on the glue, maybe scraping with a razor blade or microscope slides work great to level out things. It's a piece of glass, so it works really good. We'll go into some scraping on a fingerboard. Today I'm going to try to get through a lot of this stuff without lecturing y'all to death. All right, so what I'm doing here is I've got my nut in the slot. And what I do is I literally start with one side. So I can feel it on one side of this nut where it's overhanging. It's actually overhanging on both sides because I got it overcut. But I need to fit it to the width first. So I can use files. I've gotten to where I've never been able to hold one by hand and just file it. It's just too much. You really do need some sort of small vise to hold it. I'll take a sanding stick, and I gotta take a pretty good bit off of this. So I'm gonna start with a full-on 80 grit. And I'm trying to stay 90 degrees with my bottom because I'm trusting that the guitar was built that way. You find out, a lot of times they'll angle up, and so you're just trying to fit. That's what you're doing. And it's gonna go a little slow, so you got plenty of time to make decisions as you go, which angle you need to be on. And just be going back and forth.
one side or both sides?
I'm gonna take it off one side. I'm gonna get one side fit the way I want it, and then I'm gonna start working on the other side. And so when I fill this right now, when I run my finger across the fingerboard, I'm flush. But when I get down here to the neck, I can feel the lip. So that means that the side of that fingerboard and that lip work like, if we're looking down, here's the edge of the board, and it that's the fingerboard, and it kind of rounds down to the back of the neck, so that little spot. So when I'm fitting my nut, it's fitting right here, and then not down there. So I know when I put it back in here, I'm gonna just angle a little bit and start taking off that. I still have plenty of room on this side, so if I go too far, I still got another chance. Now let's pretend that I can't fit this directly to it. I cut it too much. That's okay. If it's your guitar, you can leave it. Then what I would opt to do is stop where I'm at. If it's shy of the sides, then I'll drop fill with finish and build it up, and then it'll look even better because I'll have a lacquered in nut. It just takes a little bit more work.
Yeah, yesterday you said you may make it a little bit short, because the lacquer, I guess, has a thickness to it.
Yeah, and I won't be using nitro because that would just take you would have to build up so many coats. I'm going to use Glue Boost. It's a fill and finish. It's a fancy CA. Okay, that's all. When I say CA, that's super glue. We like to use the term CA because people don't like to hear the word super glue and guitars put together. This is a company that makes this, and when I first saw the product, I'm like, okay, they're just repackaging super glue and then selling it for a really high price. And then I started noticing that people I knew that would do really, really good repairs. They'd say, well, I tried it, I really liked it. And the big difference in it is, I don't like paying for it. It's expensive. I mean, like this together would probably be $35.
What's the name of it again?
Glue Boost.
Blue Goose?
Boost.
Boost.
B-O-O-S-T. And you can buy it straight off their website. It's gonna be the cheapest place.
And that?
And this is fill and finish. This is the thick stuff. This is the thin stuff that I use. And I use this to drop fill finishes a lot now. I repaired a whole Taylor side that was caved in once I pressed all the pieces out using this. Because I was able to fill the voids and build up coats quick. If I would have done it with nitro, I would have been drop filling for weeks, and then I would have had to let that nitro sit for 3 months before I was sanding. And that way it enabled me to do it in one day, which I wouldn't use nitro on the Taylor anyway because it wouldn't stick very well. These Taylors are like a UV cured finish. Which and if you send a guitar back to Taylor and it has a ding in that guitar, they use super glue to fill that ding, and then they'll sometimes spray a top coat on there if they need to. And that's what I do. I use a Mohawk product. If I've got a satin Taylor, anybody have a satin Taylor? So yeah, if the finish on yours was satin and you had a crack, I would have filled it. I would have glued it first with Titebond. Or I would have glued it with fish glue. One of the two. Hide glue, maybe. It just depends on if I'd had it. Probably opt for fish glue. Titebond if it was in the spruce top, because a lot of times it will really hide. And if I know that I'm confident that a crack's not going to come back open, then I would feel fine to use Titebond. If I felt like it could come back open, I would use more water soluble glue. But on top of that, I would fill with drop fill this.
Run the same.
And then I would shave it with a razor blade. This is after it's already been repaired. This is just fixing the finish. Shave it down with a razor blade, and then put a top coat of Mohawk. I use a lot of Mohawk finishes out of a rattle can. They have they're called Perfect Blends, and they've got a couple different sheens. And Taylor would recommend. I think it was an 80-40 sheen. They really just come in different. It'll say matte, it'll say semi-gloss, they'll have a gloss, and I think it's really those three. And I find the matte works the best. And it'll almost, once you do that, and you hit it with the perfect blend, it's almost undetectable. It's
They sell those little powder kits with it that, you know, you just mix the right color with the.
You talking about Glue Boost?
Yeah.
Or- Yeah, I got all that. I've been having issues trying to figure out how to make it work.
Oh, yeah.
You know, powders don't seem to want to mix up with it, but I don't have enough experience with it because it's new.
Do you use the
Okay.
activator when you use the glue boost?
Yes. Yeah, so maybe we'll cut this one shallow and do some of that. Again, I get off on a long tangent there.
It's up here.
Goodness, do that.
Now I'm angling that just a little bit to get that rounded.
Do you try and do all of your sanding right there before you ever get it on the guitar? Or do you do a little bit of sanding once you glue it in?
That'll depend on how well I made my mark up here. And sometimes I decide that I want to go ahead and make the excess lower. Like if I didn't cut it close enough to my line, then, because I don't want the string engulfed into the slot. I really want, at most, on the bigger strings, half the diameter of the string above the nut. It helps the tuning, because you don't have all this bone surrounding the whole string.
You want to say that again? What do you do about the treble string?
Treble strings, you know, they're so fine. If they're down in there, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
Mainly because they're not wrapped, so they want to slide across the surfaces anyway. But your wound strings, they want to grab. You know, they've almost got a little bit of a grit there. All right, I'm almost there. So I'm gonna switch grits.
What would you do to a nut? Somebody's playing flat when the strings on the bass.
I cut it the same way. Just closely match the gauge string. We were discussing yesterday, I don't always go exactly the same gauge. Sometimes I'll go a gauge wider or use the same gauge file, but maybe rock my file back and forth. I don't want the string to be able to roll around in there, but I don't want it to bind. You also have situations where you're dealing with musicians. They don't always know what they don't think a whole lot sometimes about gauge strings, and then sometimes they're at a gig and they're in a situation where they just grab a string from somebody else and it may be a different gauge. So there's a lot of things can happen, or maybe somebody wants to change gauge.
What is that?
You know, Martins tend to be slotted for mediums, but we all put lights on there and we're all fine. You know, we just don't have an issue.
Wow.
I was just showing pictures on your Instagram of that repair. That way it's amazing, you can't tell.
Yeah, it turned out good. It looks better in the photo.
Did you patch it on the inside?
That one, the pieces came back fairly, really good, and I didn't feel like I needed to patch anything on the inside. I felt like the patch I would put on the inside would have been really ugly, because I would have used cloth and wouldn't be able to reach it. But this stuff, I mean,
That's what you use to repair that boost?
yeah, not all the time. It just depends on what it is.
Yeah, and then that's,
Jason, you're swapping, you're cutting both sides.
Yeah,
Every time you do it.
what I'm doing now is I'm just polishing out a little bit. So I moved up from my 80 grit, and I moved up to my 320, and which is going to bring me right on. And then I'm probably going to go ahead and what I might do is cut one side leave it alone. This is my guitar, so I don't have to lacquer in both sides. And then I'll lacquer in one side and leave the other side done. And that way y'all can see the process. I'll leave that side. I got a little more to go on this one.
On a regular acoustic guitar, would you also lacquer?
Yeah, it depends on what the guitar, how the guitar was built. So
You just
trying
want
to-
match what's there.
yeah, trying to match. Like if the original, nut wasn't lacquered in,
Yeah.
then I'm not gonna do it. But a lot of times I'm doing Gibson nuts, and those are typically lacquered in. Sometimes I will, and sometimes I won't.
Is that way we can tell if it's been a vintage Gibson has been repaired, if the lacquer is there or not?
Sometimes it just pops off, because it doesn't stick to the bone or whatever material they're, over the years.
Gibson used to use a product for nuts that was like it almost looks like
Fiberglass,
PVC.
some sort of, it smells like cancer when you got it.
Yeah,
I know, it's creepy. It's the hardest thing ever too. I don't know what it is, but it's got this weave in there kind of.
yeah.
And that's on old Gibsons.
Yeah, maybe like 60s, and it was after they started using nylon.
I assume they use bone on all those pre-war things, right?
Yeah, most of them.
What was the alternative?
Well, Martin always used ivory.
Wow.
Before it was so.
Before one day leaving?
All right, so what I'm doing, I'm seeing if my fingernail can catch. So I'm gonna leave one side non-lacquered in, the other side I've got cut just a tiny amount. I would say maybe 5/1000ths of an inch in, and that was just me sanding. So before I do any of that, now I'm gonna profile this nut. So I want it to look like a Gibson nut, so we've got a Gibson nut right here. The Gibson nut doesn't have any taper up the back. The Gibson nut, so what you're doing is, if it's your own guitar, then the sky's the limit. And you can make it any shape that you want. But what I'm going for is to look like a Gibson nut if somebody at Gibson took a lot of time with it. So we're looking at the side of the fingerboard again. It's going to round up just like that, just typical. You'll see some nuts where they go like this, they kind of have a angle this way, and then they round up. I like that. That's sexier than this, but I'm going to go with this because that's what the original looked like. I generally don't like to see nuts that just look like that, just straight up. But I have cut them like that before if it's a certain kind of guitar where that's just normal.
Jason, what do you normally do? I've seen several guitars, I think I may even have one, where the nut is not basically 90 degrees. It's got that angle thing going on with the bottom of it. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, Martins.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Those aren't fun.
Yeah.
But okay, so I got a running thing at the shop, and I bragged too much, so it didn't pan out the last time. But I was on 14, and then a Martin nut, the bottom of the had made 14 in a row until this very last one, where on a Martin, vintage Martins, you will have the fingerboard, it ends there, and then you have the your headstock and your head plate. And the bottom of that slot's angled. It follows the thing of the peg head. So you don't have a 90 degree, you've got an angle, and they're all supposed to be the same, but they're not the same. And then, I don't know if I brought it, Stu Mack makes a nut file that has that angle on it. It's never really matched any Martin. So, and it never fit in a Martin slot and actually ground the whole file flatter. And so I usually only use that if I've got a really boogered up slot here, and then I'll true it with that, and then I can actually lay it face down on granite and take my nut and then run it up and down on the file, and it'll give me that angle with this angle if I'm laying the face of that nut on my granite. Over the years, I walk up to that same sander that we had in there and take the nut and I hold it and I press it up to the sander, and then I'll go back and put it on the guitar. And I've done 14 in a row that just fit like that. And then I was bragging to Bob about how awesome I am. And then I haven't done it since. So that's usually how I do it. You just got to keep working it and having it on a sander or you know, and you just keep trying to fit it. It's like fitting anything else.
How early, Martin? How early?
Oh, those are, I know my 60s still got it. They were doing it in the 70s. I've got it in my notes when they stopped. I think it was in the 80s when they decided to make the bottom flat, which makes life a lot easier. Those are hard to fit. And so now I'm gonna fit this. I'm gonna profile the top. Let's see if I can.
You mentioned in your notes, do you keep notes on all your repairs?
No, I wish I was that diligent. You know, I try to keep notes on things that I know is going to be an issue and that I need to remember. And hopefully I have time. Prime examples, I've got a Martin over there. It's 2013. It was a big dirty trick because I needed to take the neck off of it. We bought this guitar, it needed a neck set. It's a beautiful 12 string. It's a J12 or something like that. And when you look inside it, you don't see, you know, some Martin nowadays are bolted on, okay? And when you look inside a bolt on, you'll see a little plate there. A small little plate that covers the hole, where the bolt is. Now, I did know that in 94, around 93 to 94, the Shenandoah models were dovetail joints glued in and bolted. So people would take those and they would undo the bolt and think the neck's supposed to come out with a straight tenon joint like an old bolt on, but it wouldn't, and then eventually figured out you had to treat it like a regular dovetail joint, steam the joint out. Okay, and that was a bad idea because repair guys didn't know, and Martin stopped doing it. There was no reason to. You know, just if you're going to bolt it on, just have a straight tenon, not a dovetail. So I get this one, and I made the assumption that it's a regular dovetail joint. Looked inside, there's no plate. I looked in the, as I noticed that it was coming off the guitar, so I took the tongue off of it. And when I took the tongue off of it, the whole neck would just start rocking. Like, you know, so it's like, I'm going to try to attempt this without steam. I have a jig that you put it on, and then it presses on the back of the heel, and it presses up on the neck. And as soon as I touched that, I heard pop. I was like, where was the pop? And I was like, okay, well, I had a piece on the dovetail. And I looked back, and I had cracked through the whole heel, right? So, and then once the heel cracked off, I saw a bolt. I looked back inside the guitar, I was like, well, how did they put the bolt in there? Well, the plate they put inside the guitar covered the whole block, so it looks like a traditional block. And so then what I ended up doing was course, I repaired the heel. So if we look inside this guitar, you see how the block is, we're looking at the block there. You know, there's no plate there that you can see. It just looks like a martinet plate. You know, but it actually is, because all the way aside, so the whole thing they covered, right? So, and in there, there's a bolt. It's not in there right now. And then
That covers the truss rod and everything?
Now, the truss rod's up here, but there's a bolt in there.
That's just.
So what happened was, I had snapped the heel off from here, just clean off the guitar. So, and on the other side, you see that's where the bolt goes in. So it has split right in the center of that, so I could see that threaded brass insert, like the whole threaded brass insert. So what I did was, first I glued the heel back on, and then I ended up sanding off the heel. In that finish coat, it was a 2013, if you ever got one. If you touch this with even 800 grit, it takes the color clean off. Color's right on top, not like all your other markings.
Finish, it's not.
Yeah,
it's not
super
as
thin finish, it feels great, I like it. But, so, I was gonna smooth out the crack, you know, and as soon as I hit it with some 800 grit, all color gone. So then what I ended up doing was from here down, I sanded and then refinished that section at the bottom. Yeah, you can't really, if you get the light just right, you might find that crack.
What's the model? Is that one got like HPL sides, or is that solid wood body, or?
That I don't know. I am just completely unfamiliar with it.
It's pretty good.
It's a solid sides, and of course solid top, and pretty guitar. And I suspect it sounds good.
It's like a Gibson jumbo.
So what we notice here is this was glued in at one time. The glue joint failed. It's a really slim dovetail. I'll pass this around here. It's a really slim dovetail. So it wouldn't come out like this, like a normal Martin that's a bolt on. It has to come up and out, and it would have to be steamed off. This glue joint broke or failed, and that's why the neck needed a reset, because it was sliding out a little bit. Because the dovetail wasn't fitted very well, because I had a bolt in there too. But let me pass that around and look at it. And this is just for, but it goes back to what I was telling you, Van. Like, I'll take notes of that, because that's a problem. That's a problem that I never even thought of. And it goes back to when I was talking about when you're doing repair work, you're never really in control, because you just
Do you have
don't know.
These two little holes here? I've seen that.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that somebody's kit has that.
Yeah.
Your kit has that.
Yeah,
Is
it's
that-
the indexing,
Was it a Martin kit?
it came from Martin.
Maybe that's how they're doing CNC or something, hanging on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it,
that's how they index them onto the block.
Okay.
okay. Well, that makes sense. See, I don't take very many new Martin necks off. Most of them don't need neck sets. So, all right. Now I'm going to profile this nut. And my favorite file is this single cut file again, single cut on one side, double cut on the other. Nicholson that I got at the hardware store that's behind our shop. You know. And so when I cut this, I've got a flat top. Right now my nut, we all saw what it's shaped like. It's shaped just like this right now. I'm gonna cut that section off right here.
Yeah, really.
And start rounding it.
Yeah.
And you're just taking that one edge off, and that'll give it that rounded shape.
That's what I'm starting at. I'm gonna have to tie to this vise. And then I'm working up the nut, and I'll start. rounding like this. And I'll barely get the face, because I don't really want to change what I did, what I cut in there, because I want to have some space there.
Italian overnight.
So I'm gonna only do a few swipes up there just to smooth out the sanding marks. Okay, now when I'm cutting this, I don't have to be exact, but what I'm looking for is, if I'm looking at the back of this nut, I got a 12-inch radius here. And the top of this nut, since we use a flat pencil, follows that radius. And so let's say we take this nut and we're gonna look at the back of it. Looking down the headstock. What I wanna see is, you got a top radius. That's the very top of the nut that you can see. And then remember, we're rounding down this way. And I want to kind of see the same radius off the back. I mean, it doesn't have to be, this is just aesthetics, you know, so but it looks good that way. When you look at a nut and you see the profile. We're also going to profile this edge some too. And then we're going to polish it out.
Well, really, it's not really just aesthetics, is it? Because the strings are gonna go down.
Yeah,
The
I
braid
mean, you're
back.
right. But you know, it really helps with that too. You can always open up the back of that slot,
Yeah.
which is what I do. If you didn't get it, that's what I'm saying. Is if that doesn't happen, because it's tough to make a nut, especially if it's your first time. I mean, don't beat yourself up. I mean, just do the best. These are the things to look for when you see things I look for when I see a nicely carved nut.
So get multiple blanks is what you're saying?
Yeah. You want it to look like a CNC did it.
Yes.
You polish it out to the nicest looking plastic you can. We have that running joke. Bob always says that. Look at this nut. It looks just like plastic. But it's better. All right. So I got a rough profile of what I want with a file.
Just by hand, otherwise.
And then I'm going to kiss those sides. I'm going to round over. And I'm going to move my file back a little bit, and just round down at that same profile. And I'm going to come right back up with it. I usually stop right about there. I'm going to pass this nut around so you can see what it looks like. All right. I'm going to go into some fine sanding now. I'm going to switch over to, I don't know if I brought it. I'm going to grab some 400 grit. And I'm just going to put it on my file here. I'm going to use a file to do the sides.
Is that just because the file's straight? Or
I mean, I'm sorry,
it's
yeah, it's nice and flat. This is not my file, but my sanding stick I made out of a piece of aluminum. You can make it out of a piece of wood, you know. Why not have a really pretty ebony one, or if you got a scrap of rosewood. You'll be covering up with sandpaper, but
The handling shit.
yeah, you can brag about it to all your friends.
Where do you write the grid on that, Jason? No, where do you write the grid on that sandpaper? Once you get it glued on, where do you write the grid?
It's in his brain.
What do I write it on with?
Yeah,
A Sharpie.
but so it's right on the sandpaper though.
Yeah, I wrote it right on sandpaper.
Do you just not use that section, or could you still? Or
Yeah,
would
you could.
Okay.
I don't see why not.
The
But it's so
Sharpie-
close to the next grit that, you know.
Yeah.
And then when it wears out, I pull it off, clean it off with some naphtha. You know, because naphtha or lighter fluid will clean off your the residue real quick.
Get a nice head buzz while you're at it.
Yeah, don't huff the naphtha.
Well, you say you're gonna bring it up to that.
You go up to 600 on that?
Yeah, well, at the shop I go up to about 400 to 600, one of the two. I'll go up to 800 on this because I'm going to hand buff it. Because normally I would go up to 400 to 600, walk over to the buffer, buff it, and be done. And it would give me a nice sheen. But since we don't have a buffer, then we're gonna buff it by hand. And most of you probably don't have a buffer sitting around in your house, do you?
This thing would be incredibly top heavy, these centers that are on here, it's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah, what kind of buffer are you talking about for a nut?
I use the same big buffer that I use to buff out guitar finishes.
Just a bucket wheel?
Yeah, just a buffer wheel.
Do you use any like compound?
Yeah. I use, what is it, Menza? Stuff I bought from Stu Mac. They've got a fine grit and they've got a medium grit.
Green, red.
And I use the medium grit. All this stuff is white. I use the medium grit for almost everything. Because usually I'm not doing buffing brand new finishes. So I'm usually trying not to get everything super perfect because usually I'm matching a finish to a finished guitar mostly in my shop. And I got two wheels. I got a black wheel because the frets turn it black. That goes for fingerboards and fretwork. And then the other wheel I use for finishes, nuts and things like that. You could use a small wheel. You could probably use a Dremel. You'll see that this goes pretty quick with just using 3M rubbing compound. And I remembered to go by the shop last night on the way home and picked up the few things that I forgot yesterday.
Harbor Freight sells a jeweler's buffer, it's about
Uh-huh.
this big.
That would probably work just fine. It'd probably be better than my method. My buffing wheel's so big that it polishes out my nails, so I always So. Yeah, you can just sit anywhere. It'll be all right. We own that guitar. If we put a ding on it, I'll tell Bob you did it.
Did the previous owner put those fingers on there? Do you know?
Yeah. Previous owner of that guitar was David Garber. He's a really cool guy. He's got a bunch of cool Martins. All right, I'm just kind of facing off the back.
Vestavia that's always posting guitar, unique and collectible guitars for sale.
No, I don't think David.
Who is that guy?
Joey Elmore.
Oh, that's Joey. I know Joey. Joey's always got crazy stuff.
I don't know where he finds this stuff.
All right. Moving up to 600 grit. I don't have to spend a lot of time on it with a 600. I'm just taking out whatever little scratches at the 400. And once I get up to 600 grit, I can actually soften up the face of that a little bit. Our nut slots are going to be lower than the face, and the 600 grit's not going to take a whole bunch of it off. I just want it to be a little bit softer, just for the touch of the player. Now, when I talk about the face, that's that front edge that the strings take off of. But remember, they're going to be lower, so I'm not actually cutting into the part where the string is. I still want it to look like it's a nice, crisp edge. I just don't want it to hurt if you come off the neck and you slam onto the side of that nut. I want it to be, a little bit of a softer edge.
User friendly.
All right. I'm gonna go a little bit of 800, and that's why I like these things. I can just take a little bitty piece.
Are those rolls expensive?
Yeah, they're not gonna be cheap.
Do they last though if you?
I've been using these for every day, all day long for probably 4 months, and that's with me. And I'll also try to where's my sanding beam? Like I got a piece of it here. I've got long pieces of it on the bottom of this. So then I'll take this and kind of roll it up, and then use this sandpaper for other things. When it gets kind of worn, I'll use it, you know, for just general random stuff if I need to, just to try to conserve it as much as I can. Sometimes I just go into a fit and
That's
just
some on
throw it
that
away.
beam right there.
What?
That's some on that beam right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a great width for all that stuff too. So I still have scratches on the side of this one, which I'm fine with because I'm going to go back down to 320. I usually have a shot lamp that's right above me.
You do?
They're pretty bright. I like them. Those are LEDs too.
Yeah.
I'll move back up to a little bit of 400 grit on that side. I'm okay with this side being, and I should have only stopped at 320 there, because this is the side that I'm going to put the glue boost on. So it's going to polish out. Plus I kind of would, maybe that would give it a little bit more of a bite. All right, I'm going to buff this out and I'm going to pass it around.
You using that same tool you used yesterday?
No, I'm going to buff it with a paper towel. Now the drawback to buffing it out is it's hard to draw on it once it's buffed when we make our pencil marks. But I usually do it anyway. It's like the lead doesn't want to stick to it. That's 3M rubbing compound that I get from an automotive store. All your AutoZones and all that stuff carry it. And it's not even it's just the rubbing compound, not the swirl remover. It'll just say 3M rubbing compound right on the. And see, and you can do this on the guitar too. You can do this to an existing nut. If you wanted to make it pretty, you tape up across the board and across your behind the nut on the headstock, and then go up on your grits. And then if you want your nut to shine like this, you can do all this on your nut. Don't sand the edges while it's on the guitar unless you are confident that it's got enough finish there. And I would start with a much higher grit on the side, but on the top you can start with 400 grit and just go up from there. So one side, the bass side, I'm not polishing it out very much because I only stopped at 400 grit. And then I'm going to get the back side of it a little bit. And we're almost done, other than then we'll glue it on the guitar, let that glue sit for a while, and we'll move on to something different. And then we'll come back to the nut. We're going to move on to fretwork.
Yay. Hell
And who's got the Electroneck? Somebody showed me that yesterday.
That was mine, I didn't bring it though.
Okay, that's all right. This will be good for you because I'm going to start with the neck that I built and then true the fingerboard, and then we're going to put frets in it in a way that I usually don't put frets in a whole guitar, but I'm going to do it with a hammer and 2 calls. You know, I'm trying to think of the cheapest way you can fret a guitar.
What are you gonna do to Gibson?
If we have time, I decided to do that, and then I brought a Taylor because it's got binding, and that's one thing I forgot. I was like, you know, that's a half of everybody's guitars are going to have binding, so you really need to know binding, and then that way it'll be a partial, so I can get the frets in, and we can go ahead and do some leveling and crowning. Get at that, but I want to start with this because I want to show you how I true a board, which is real simple, especially on a new build, because you're not worried about, I mean, this is the guitars with truss rods. Especially a double action rod, you can zero it out and go from there.
You have those STUMAC fret tang nippers.
Yeah, I got two different kind here, and I'll show you how to do it without a nipper or without any tools except for you can literally use your fret cutters. You know, these are your. We'll go over some of the fretting tools, and but that nut right there is what you can do with just some grits of sandpaper, and it's a buffing compound, and you can make it shine. Now, I don't know, me, if it was, I mean, if I wasn't standing in front of y'all, I probably would have sanded it to 400 grit and slapped it on my guitar, you know, because it would have a nice satin look to it, and that would have been fine for me. And then you kind of decide what you're working on, what you want to look like. If everything on the guitar is nice and it has this cool satin look, why not make the nut satin, just like the rest of the guitar, instead of having just this one part on the guitar that's super shiny like that. So you kind of just, you know, it's art at that point. You're just figuring out what you want it to look like. All right, I'm going to start fretting up. Truing up a board. Before we do that, I showed you the fret. These are for frets. This is what, when you take a piece of fret wire.
What size is that wire, Jason?
This is 80/40. It's not what I'm going to put in this guitar. This is what I got to put in the Taylor.
What do those numbers mean?
Okay. When I say 80/40, those are the measurements of your wire being.
Right there behind your butts.
Oh,
This up.
yes, thank you. All right, so your fret wire, here we got some right here. We've got, when I say 80/40, the width here, you know, from this point to this point, you know, 80 thousandths of an inch, and then the height would be 40. That's standard Martin wire that they typically use in most Martins. Taylor use it a lot. Taylor, some of them, they're 95 wide, 45. I've gotten where that's the wire that I like. Gibson's fretless wonder started out at 36 thousandths of an inch, and those were 106 wide. You can get even wider than that, up to like 110. These flush cuts, this is what their purpose in life is. That and pulling bridge pins and other stuff, pulling nuts. But to cut it flush as it can be to the fingerboard. And that's why the ends are ground. The other tool that's a must-have if you're doing refrets or even if you're building, this is the same. This is a mini version of this, and that's what I use to pull frets. And I've almost completely worn this one out. I've got another one in here that I don't like as much because I'm not used to using it. It looks almost identical, but it just feels different in my hand. And that was an old Craftsman that I found in a guitar case that somebody was using for clippers, but I ground the face of that. And you can use a bench grinder. You can buy one. You can you can get it close. I use the same sander, a table sander, and then we'll just hold it on there and actually grind it flat and then polish it out on sandpapers. So those work good. We have a fret tang expander. I'm gonna send a piece of fret wire around and everybody. This will do two different things.
I can get you close.
All right. Two different things it'll do. The top part of this will actually crimp the wire and make it wavy. It'll wave back and forth, so it'll expand it. And the harder you squeeze, the more it waves that tang. This part's the tang, the part that comes down. Now, if you want to flatten out a barb, you can take the other side of it. It looks like this, and then you can press there, and you can flatten out the barbs, or you can go back and kind of flatten out whatever the wave that you put in there. What it's doing is it's making, when you put a wave, you'll see it. It's expanding the tang. It's not necessarily making it bigger, it's making it wavy, so it goes back and forth, so it'll fill a slot if you need to. I use this a lot when I press down, and let's say the centers aren't staying in, or the edges aren't staying down, then I can expand it in certain parts, and then squeeze the fret in or hammer it in. You can also use it to try to press out a neck within reason. So you are welcome to, while I'm talking, just go down that wire and squeeze
What's
away.
the difference on a refret and a new build? Would you want to do one, would you want to crimp or
A new build, I'm not gonna have to, because, unless you cut your slots too wide. Now, I used to slot them on fingerboards with a handsaw, and then at some point I decided I don't like slotting boards. So I usually buy them, unless it's a scale length that, I'm not gonna get. So if I'm buying I'm gonna make a fender neck, then I'm probably just gonna buy a board. And then, unless it's out of a piece of wood that, specific, but I would end up buying in my shop like 4 or 5 fingerboards and then choosing them when I want to, and then I've got other boards for other purposes or for another build that it might match.
Where do you buy your boards from?
StewMac, LMI. LMI will cut you whatever you want, and whatever radius within reason. They want radius bird's eye maple. You want the radius because they use a shaper, and it'll just blow that bird's eye out.
Squirrely grain.
Okay, so here's a file. That is what I used to use to make my beveled edge on the frets. Now recently, I've always done it that way, where on the side of my fingerboard, I'm gonna grab this, I would just freehand it with that at a certain angle. But they make a tool for that. I just never had one until recently. And this goes down the side of your board like this. And it has a file that keeps you at the angle that you need to be for a bevel. And that's the easiest way to do that. The only drawback to it is this is one angle. If I've got some customer, I got one customer that tells me when I refret his guitars to not put any bevel. They come straight and then just 90 degrees to the side. It's uncomfortable, but he can do a lot more vibrato on the high side and the low side because he's got a little more space.
Is one of those worth getting if you're starting out?
You can make one.
Well, yeah, you can make one of those, especially if you got in the guild. You got a bunch of jig guys. You got Jim. He likes to make jigs for everything.
Yeah.
Jim doesn't like to touch the guitar. He just wants to.
If you're doing like a refret on an older guitar, are you always replacing all the frets? Or do you do the first 7 if that's all?
No, I'm gonna do a partial a day. I mean, I gotta tell you that. There's no reason to. People will bring me guitars a lot, and they'll say, "I've got divots in the frets, like 1 through 5."
Right.
And then they'll want me to dress the frets, like level them down to take the divots out. I'll measure that divot. If that divot's, let's say they got 80/40 wire, and that fret wire is gonna get down to 35 thousandths. 35 thousandths is getting into the fretless blunder range. We call them fretless blunders. Most people don't like them. That's when Gibson was making fret wire that was so low that, sometimes for some people it feels good, but most of us, we don't want a whole lot of fingerboard drag on the flesh of our fingertips. So I try to not dress, I don't wanna dress everything on this board that hasn't been touched, because most of us aren't playing much past the 7th fret, you know. Who was it, Elvis said there's no money past the 5th fret? But, so I would opt to try to talk to them, well, instead of dressing everything down to those lowest points, why don't we just replace those? And, it's gonna be about the same amount of work. And, in some cases, maybe even cheaper. You know, if you're good at pulling frets and putting them in, you can do it fairly quick. That's what I'm gonna do with this Taylor. I don't wanna dress all of his frets down to that point. I'm just gonna replace probably the first 7, but the side 8, you know, I don't get picky with how many, you know, I'm in there doing the job, so. Real quick before we start this, I'm gonna glue this nut in. Then we're gonna start putting frets in this guitar after I make sure the board is true. I got all these cute little bottles because I didn't want to bring a whole stash of stuff. And I found that I've been working out of this toolbox like this for a week trying to remember, put everything back to bring. And I really enjoyed putting everything in a small bottle and having one little, you know, so I've learned a lot.
So what kind of glue is that?
This is Tite Bond. I'm gonna put some on both edges, on the bottom.
So you just put a little down.
I put a little
You don't
bit.
have to major to glue it in, right?
Yeah, I don't really want it in there.
Where'd you get that cute little bottle?
I got that at the Amazon.
Yes.
They have everything, and I feel guilty when I buy off of it, but I still do.
Why bother gluing it in?
Well, some, especially classical makers, some classical makers don't. They, you know, they're just in there.
I had one of mine pop out one time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I glued it back in.
Yeah, but in some guitars, you're gonna have your break angles that go this way, and let's say your E string, your low E string, and your A strings are gonna have a little more tension, so a lot of times it'll kick it over the side. Classical makers sometimes get away with it because they pay real good attention to where the strings come off to those posts, and to keep everything in line. So by all means, if you can make a nut stay there without any kind of glue, then that's great. Make sure this is water and not the stuff Jay brought in. Now I'm just cleaning up the glue around there with a little bit of water.
And that's just water?
Yeah, it's just water. It's just
It wasn't ever. Well, that's just Tite Bond like you can get at Home Depot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do the numbers matter, Tite Bond?
Yeah,
They do?
if you ever wanna take it out, use original.
Okay.
Red label.
Yeah, I always use red label. I mean, I say that like I've got experience with the other stuff. But I don't have any experience with other stuff, so I'm scared of it.
They're more waterproof.
All right, I'm gonna let that dry. Realistically, that would be dry enough to do it in 15 minutes, maybe even sooner.
It doesn't need clamp or anything?
If you did it right, you're fine. Got to clamp it.
We need to take a break before you get started, or?
Yeah.
How's everybody doing?
Yes.
Break wise.
Yeah, what time is it?
Cinema.
Okay.